Hello and welcome to the Echo Chamber podcast. My name is Tony Groves and today we're talking Vulture Funds, guys. As always, I'm joined by my co-host and co-author of the government's Ireland 2040 plan, Martin McMahon. Martin, I know you can't really talk about working with the Strategic Communications Unit, but I just want to tell you, the fact that you work for Leo now makes me feel this is going to be a disaster. I'm delighted that you're in there now.
I've given them a little something to spin now for the rest of the week. We'll see how they get on with that.
More importantly, we're delighted to be joined and actually it's been a while in the making, I have to say, in the Tortoise Shack by the CEO of Irish Mortgage Holders Organisation and iCare Housing, Director of Inner City Helping Homelessness and Lifeline, the ambulance service, and most importantly, an advocate for the endangered scavengers, bird of prey, vultures. David Hall. David, nice to meet you again.
Yes, Tony, they're furry vultures.
Furry vultures.
Warm, cosy, friendly, cuddly.
Misunderstood
and benign. But more importantly, be very careful of a vulture who clips their toenails.
Oh, right, go on.
They scrape.
Well, I tell you, David,
gouge.
It's been interesting to watch the country wake up to what you've been talking about with a couple of other notable people for a number of years. I know myself professionally, I reached out to you a while back, a few years ago, even on LinkedIn, I think it was, and we were kind of, and we were, at the time, I think I was less concerned. I thought maybe they'd do better deals than I kind of bought the hype.
Yeah, I think the IBRC loans, originally government gave a red carpet treatment to Vulture Funds. We owned IBRC, Denise McCormack and a bunch of the IBRC
That's right, yeah,
mortgage holders, got together as an interested group, and I joined them for a number of protests and engaged with them in 2014 outside Leinster House. And we warned and said very clearly, you've got to understand that there's a big difference between someone having a difference of opinion. No difficulty with someone having a difference of opinion, but when facts override that, there's an issue that gets ignored from time to time. So government opened the floodgates, brought them in 65 individual meetings with Vulture Funds, 5 meetings with organisations or people advocating for the debtor. I brought them in, red carpet treatment, allowed the 110, section 110, the charitable status section, come in. And, so if you want to lose your home and lose your asset, you have a good chance to do a good deal on debt. The most abhorrent thing and the most outrageous commentary that's currently being propagated, and actually, if you think of any other conversation, tobacco, alcohol, any health issue, there is always a spokesperson for the industry available.
Mm-hmm.
No matter what it is, car, rural Ireland, drinking, smoking, whatever it is.
You get an advocate.
You'll find somebody coming up who represents them on a professional basis. In Ireland, no one speaks out on behalf of the bank, but bank lovers. No one comes forward about Vulture Funds, but vulture lovers. Many have skin in the game in a variety of aspects of that. So we have a bizarre situation now where we have vultures rampant in the country who bought loans with only plates on the door.
Mm-hmm.
It's taken them a couple of years to get organised. And this sort of bullshit of, they're much better to deal with. That's factually incorrect. They're much better to deal with if you want to hand back your keys and depart with a lump sum payment or your debt written off. Absolutely, they're definitely better to deal with, but not if you want to stay in your home.
No, and I think to taking that statement in as its full face value, taking a step back and saying these companies made huge, vast profits already from the state and paid next to nothing in tax, literally on the basis of getting charitable status through the Section 110 and being able to manipulate our entire system. So even if they did come in and serve a purpose, as we were told, they certainly weren't paying their way and they certainly weren't adding any value to the system. And in the meantime, now that we've tried to close the loopholes there, they're already talking about the double malt and,
But if you're a Vulture Fund, and Vulture Funds coming in has a general purpose in the commercial world to buy debt. The difficulty with the family home loans it's an abject failure of the banks not to address them. So, and that's not just me saying that. So when you've got the head of the insolvency service, Lorcan O'Connor, 2 of the leading PIPs, the personal insolvency practitioners in the state, only this week in the Irish Times confirmed that banks did not engage, and Permanent TSB specifically did not engage in relation to dealing with debt. That says a lot. And also, the same Lorcan O'Connor went before the Oireachtas Committee in Justice and openly in front of the legislators who gave the insolvency legislation and said that the banks are playing fast and loose with the legislation. And that's deeply concerning. So when banks come out and say, these are all basket cases, these are all sinners who didn't engage with us, the honest people, we never lied about our solvency prior to the crash, we never lied about tracker mortgages, we are the bastions of honesty. So believe us when we tell you that these are all sinners we're selling, which is absolutely wrong and factually incorrect.
It can't be true that 14,000 of these people never engaged. Cards on the table. I've been in Hatch Street in the AMU, the arrears mortgage arrears management unit in permanent TSB. I know how the operation works. I've seen it up close. So without giving away any professional secrets, I also know that permanent TSB were deemed an unviable and unsustainable bank for a number of years by the ECB, and they submitted plan and restructuring plan to the ECB, and on all occasions were told that they weren't a viable company. The reason they weren't viable is because their balance sheet was in tatters. They had assets that were out the window. They had to sell part of the UK business, and they had non-performing loans, nearly twice the average of the other Irish banks. So they'd lent recklessly. That's where they were. Now what they've done is we've come to a situation whereby, and I think just before we were downstairs you mentioned daft.ie and how it's all kicked off again. That's because the non-performing loans, the assets now underlying them, are attractive suddenly.
Yeah, and there's a big danger with that now, because if those assets transfer to, say, a Vulture Fund, like a Vulture Fund, anyway, I've met them. They will tell you categorically what they won't. Not one of them has ever said to me, "You bastard," for giving out about it. Not one of them. And actually, yesterday, two directors of the biggest Vulture Funds in the world joined me on LinkedIn and connected. Never once have they ever abused or had a go, because they know that the truth is they are self-confessed predators. That's their job. They have a function life. Our issue, and my issue, is not about their business model. That's their business model. The issue is the failure to protect Irish families and not pass on the same debt write-down. Engage with the insolvency service. And many people who have approached Permanent TSB, myself included, on behalf of customers, and many people who have approached them, other professional debt advisors, have had the same story, even in circumstances where someone has engaged, where the bank has confirmed the person's goosed, a willingness to sell the house or hand back the keys, irrespective of the advice given. Their response is, will you give us 25% or 30% of the residual debt? And then you're sitting there saying, so I have engaged. I'm willing to conduct a solution that we all agree is in their best interest. You won't write off the balance of the debt. Therefore, you're now going to deem me non-engaging.
And you're going to then pursue me for...
And you're deeming me non-engaging. So that's exactly where non-engagement is a very subjective definition.
And the other scary part of this, and I know this is again speaking, I'm conscious that we're speaking in broader terms here, but in those 14,000, and likewise where Ulster Bank spoke this morning, and AIB are also sitting watching how this, because they are all going to sell parts of their loan books now. There's a scary thing that if you were someone who in the crash experienced personal difficulty, you actually entered into a renegotiation with your bank and you met the terms and conditions of that, and you've then come out of it and you're now back and they recapitalised whatever arrears were on it, and you're back in a payment structure and you're back in. They can actually sell that on the basis that at one point, a few years ago, you were actually in financial difficulty. Therefore, you're a less secure loan. You're not a tier 1 loan.
That Tony, to be honest, is the actual essence of the dangerous situation we're now in. So the normal spin that has come in the background to this stuff is these are all non-engagers. They're effectively dysfunctional members of society that are sinners, and we'll sell on sinners. The fact is that the CEO of Permanent TSB was before the Oireachtas Committee last September. He told them that he had 6,700 split mortgages. I believe the 6,700 split mortgages at the very least are contained within the 14,000. So they're completely contrary to the spin being propagated by the bank and by bank lovers as commentators by saying they're all basket cases, we should have mass repossessions. These are people who did engage, who completed financial statements, who did everything in accordance with what the requirements were, and accepted by the bank. So that's not me saying that. The bank confirmed it, accepted it, evaluated the circumstances, gave them a new contract, and they're adhering to the new contract. So there's 27,000 split mortgages in the state at the moment, of which let's say 7,000 are Permanent TSB. Are the other 20,000 non-performing loans? If you look at it, there's 120,000 mortgage restructures have taken place. And the most important statistic of all is 84% of those are made up of 4 different solutions. None of those 4 solutions None of them are provided by Vulture Funds. So what happens, those people who can't make their full repayments require some modification to the loan, and none of the modifications that keep them in their home are provided by Vulture Funds, and therein lies the inherent truth that this will lead to repossessions.
And am I right in this? There's no control over Vulture Funds. They don't fall under the remit of the central bank. Once they get your loan, that's it. You are screwed.
Yeah, like if you want to lose your asset and have other properties and stuff, and there are many people out there who will promote the fact that Vulture Funds will do deals, but traditionally the people who are promoting that are actually receiving a fee to do those deals. That's generally the route that takes place. But if a Vulture Fund takes your loan, they don't have a long-term restructuring office that wants to restructure your loan and take your monthly payments. They don't actually have an office to do it at all. They have an office to repossess your house and throw you out and take your property. That's their function in life.
They have the Vulture Fund themselves wouldn't be a regulated entity.
Yes.
So you have these companies, they're not regulated entities. They outsource their loan book management to other companies who may be regulated under the umbrella. And I remember there was a very phrase, I think we spoke about it a couple of years ago, David, the spirit of the code. Do you remember the code of conduct?
But I think the spirit of the code is like a seance.
Yes.
It depends on what you want. So the code is very simple, and if you look, there's many reports on the code, and Paul Joyce and Flack has done multiple bits of work on this, who's also a lawyer. And they're very, very simple. The Supreme Court has ruled the Code of Conduct of Mortgage Arrears has no legal grounds. So let's be clear, it is a voluntary code. And the most important part of a voluntary code, and to answer your question, Martin, around the regulation is, you can regulate the Vulture Funds all you want, but ultimately it doesn't allow for them to provide solutions. So one of the most frightening meetings I was ever at was 2 years ago in one of the main banks, where I sat at a meeting across the table and I was negotiating a number of things, and one of the most senior people in the bank said to me, or to turn to their colleague beside them and discuss the split. And the way they discussed the split mortgage was, we might withdraw that next year. And I actually sat back and, whoa, I said, that's the first time I ever understood or thought for 1 minute that any of these solutions could actually be withdrawn. Because these solutions, split mortgages, capitalisation, all of them are voluntary. Mm. So we took a case, it's a Clark versus Stepstone in the High Court last February. We lost, and it was a case whereby solutions are voluntary. So you can regulate them, but they don't have to provide any solutions. So the intermediaries, as Tony mentioned, they adhere to the Code of Conduct, but the Code of Conduct is an administrative function to execute you. Mm. It is a behavioural pattern, not a solutions-based pattern. So the only advantage I would say of regulation, and I know that Fianna Fáil looking at bringing through the bill, and I think Pascal Dunham mentioned today he may support it, and it won't provide any solutions, so forget that, it's not going to solve the problem, let's be clear. However, what it will do is, if any bank did, or Vulture Fund did what the banks did around the trackers, or any exceptionally egregious issue, at least the central bank would have the authority to go in where they currently don't.
What is the solution, David? What do you see as
the solution has always been the same. There are three cohorts of people in mortgage arrears. There are those who are eligible for social housing who will end up doing mortgage to rent, and they should have been facilitated in a proper engagement. So we've done through iCare Housing and the Irish Mortgage Holders Organisation, we are processing currently the same number of people who've been done by the mortgage rent scheme in the last 5 years, in the last 5 months. So you can't have a system where someone who has broken down trust with their bank, but you require them to engage the bank to avail of mortgage rent, where they convert the house, they surrender the home. Yes. They stay in as a social tenant where the local authority pays the rent, they pay nominal social rent, and the debt is written off. They can buy back the property for the price we buy it for over the next 30 years, irrespective of what the value of the property is over 30 years. The next cohort of people are actually the biggest and the most dangerous cohort, where they're not eligible for social housing and they can't meet the restructuring arrangements set down by the bank or the central bank.
The middle.
The middle. The voluntary solutions, by the way. Yeah. The voluntary. They could pay, and this is the nux of it, they could pay a restructure on the price that Daddy Vulture, Mammy Vulture will buy the loan for. So you have a 300 grand loan, the house is say worth 200 grand, it'll be sold to Cerberus or one of the large Vulture funds for 120 grand. They can't restructure the 300 grand loan, but they could pay a full 120 grand loan. And everyone used to sort of say it in a political way, but it wasn't actually meant in a political way. A ordinary NAMA for normal people.
Yes.
Where's my NAMA?
Yeah. And that genuinely is the solution here. And highly possible, highly probable. And even in the last week, I'm glad to say that a number of people, I call them pinstripe vultures, have approached me in relation to looking at trying to fund the purchase of the split mortgages.
Now, that if they could buy the house is back, we'll say at that price, at the book price, 120, or even maybe a little more, and throw up a bit of profit in it for somebody. That would be the long-term solution for everybody.
That should have happened. But the problem, Martin, is there's an obsessive compulsive disorder. So you've got to understand banks, and I'm not saying this in a derogatory way. Banks don't understand customers. I've dealt with every single one of them. We, through the Irish Mortgage Holders Organisation, have done 8,700 mortgage deals. 90% of people have stayed in their homes. A quarter of all bankruptcies in the state we do free of charge. We have engaged with them all. And that's the difference in relation to speaking about them rather than in just a generic Vulture Fund way. The issue here is they don't understand customers. They weren't able to engage and discuss with customers. They just say they didn't engage with us under their rules, under their terms. Debt surrounds you. Debt cripples people.
Yeah.
Men, women who are, some of the clients and people we would have, if anybody looked at them and said, sure, that person could run a multinational, yet they're in with you and crippled. 10% of the Oireachtas are clients of ours, of the Shannon and the Dáil. And that was previously...
the rest of them are bloody landlords.
previously stated. So it's a very powerful thing, debt, and it disturbs people. And
people kill themselves over there.
There's hundreds have killed themselves. More people in the last 8 years of suicide have been involved with killing themselves because of bank debt, not just general suicides, more than there has been in relation to road accidents. So it has absolutely destroyed people. But because of that, and the NAMA for ordinary families is absolutely doable. There is no, and I have spent 2 years setting up iCare, which was a torturous occasion to do because of all the regulatory requirements and the funding requirements. And in knowing that was done, absolutely it can be done for ordinary families. 300 grand loan is being sold to a Vulture Fund for 120 grand. The same banks had an obsessive compulsive disorder and would not write down debt for the ordinary family. Now, in a heartbeat, on a wholesale basis, they'll write it down for a Vulture Fund, who'll benefit, not pay tax, and luckily now is not just regarded as a charity because they were last year.
Well, it's interesting when you mention mortgage to rent, because the numbers that were done on mortgage to rent were literally minuscule. Like it was always in the toolkit, because we used to refer to the solutions as the toolkit, and it was always the one that was never taken out of the box. It always sat there, and it was like, oh well, if it gets to really, really bad, that was the option. But the banks always had a veto as well, David. Yeah,
but if you mentioned the toolbox, and you're right, I have to remember there are a number of solutions. The solutions are not just random. No. The solutions are called a waterfall.
Yeah.
And the waterfall starts at the top and ends at the end. The top is the least expensive for a bank. See, this is where the disingenuous stuff comes. It's not about the right solution for you. The way they operate their waterfall of solutions is they cascade from the top to the bottom, starting with the least expensive, which is like term extension to capitalisation for arrears. Mortgage to rent was an expensive one simply because the inherent expectation was you were going to have to write off the debt because the person, by being eligible for mortgage to rent, couldn't do it. So, but mortgage to rent was a very clever, very good idea, horrifically executed, and it was a little cabal between the housing agency and the banks, and they sort of sat down and designed this protocol that would make make any geek squirm looking at this protocol. But ultimately, they have the veto, and they have veto on a lot of stuff. And if you look at there's a recent judgment in the High Court for a personal insolvency arrangement, and this is a very frightening one, and it's done, and the client's name is done, and it's a public document. And I only read it yesterday, that's why I'm so au fait with it. But this, back to your veto, this is where a bank, which is Permanent TSB, said no to a personal insolvency arrangement. It was brought into the High Court to appeal it. The most frightening application that the bank made, this was somebody in a split mortgage you mentioned earlier on, performing. And they actually wanted to say, we don't want the condition that PIP has put into this judgment or application, where when we review the person, we want to be able to review them outside the Insolvency Service guidelines. And the Insolvency Service guidelines for expenditure are the low-end guidelines, the minimum guidelines. Okay. And here is a review by the bank that currently owns the loan, wanting flexibility on the minimum expenditure guidelines allowed by the Insolvency Service. And they have full control. Full control.
And I mean, the ISI, the Insolvency Service of Ireland, they will give you, Martin, they will say to you, this is what you're allowed, say, on a monthly basis for, if you've $2,000 coming in, this services your debt, this services your light heat, your food, and there's €12 there to spend on to put away for Christmas.
Yeah.
It is literally to the bone. It is and when I say €12, they'll probably factor in €4 for.
Do you know how to the bone it is? Most of the banks actually add on a bit.
Yes. Oh yeah. Absolutely. No.
That's how low it is. The most of the banks actually, one of the only things the most positive thing actually with the insolvency service when it started was getting this grounding of the insolvency service guidelines. But actually, the banks, to be fair, one of the positive parts is many of them actually add on a percentage. So, and that just shows you how low they are.
They used to, the bank would at standard almost go, well, how many children in the household? And they'd say, well, we'll add 65 quid per child for the month.
And how litigious are the banks?
Well, in the last number of years, and again, there's fact, there's fiction, and there's opinion. The facts are, there's 76,000 people still in arrears. There's 33,000 people in arrears in more than 2 years. 92% of the total figure of arrears is made up by that 33,000 people, because they each owe in arrears of 75,000 per household. And these are individual mortgages. Unfortunately, banks don't talk about humans, they don't talk about families, they talk about loans. And there's 33,000 loans is 135,000 people. And there's 33,000 repossession proceedings that have been entered into the court process in the last 4.5 years. Many bank and vulture lovers will say there's not been many repossession orders. But they forget to say that, the reason there's not been many repossession orders is we've had multiple sort of temporary optical changes made since 2012, where we've had an insolvency service, we've had the visa removed, we have the bankruptcy law go from 12 years, went to 3 years, went to 1 year. We've had split mortgages introduced. We've had so we've had a variety of, the Iwalia scheme launched. Actually, the Iwalia scheme, I think, was the most launched scheme in the history of the state. I think it was launched 4 times.
Wait for it. It'll be broken this year.
I think it's going into Martin's plan for 2040. So that's the problem. It's that scheme was launched 3 times. These are all they're all schemes, and I mean schemes in the original negative pejorative sense. It's a scam. They've delayed stuff, and during that time, go back to your original question, Martin. What would you do during that time? What they should have done is done the mini NAMA, but they've an obsessive compulsive disorder. Because if you talk to a bank honestly, they'd say 80% of our people are paying the mortgage. We're fucked if we're going to facilitate 20% in case 1 or 2 and the 80% stop paying.
Well, this comes back, and Tony and I speak about this quite a lot. We talk about the politics of spite. And it is the politics of spite. And it spreads to banks, it's in the financial institutions. This tsunami that people have spoken about forever, is it that these measures have just held the tsunami back?
All held it back. And I'd have a number of people who would criticise me, and it actually is quite unnerving to have. It's like saying to you, Martin, I think you're going to get cancer, and then you don't get it, and then have your man turn around and say to me, you're fucking wrong.
Yeah.
I said the tsunami repossession is coming because statistically speaking, if you can't pay money, if you can't pay your debt, they're legally entitled to repossess your house unless you're. And the danger here is unless you engage and get a restructure. And back to Tony's point, now you engage and get a restructure, and you're still not safe. So it's very unnerving for me when you look at the numbers that are involved to be saying there's a tsunami with an attempt to get people to engage, to prevent it, having a number of solutions put into the ether, to have a number of people turn around and say, Jesus, you were wrong. It's not over yet,
No, and we had a problem.
No one's gone away. Yes, as the lads of the north would say. It's not gone away,
But David, we had Mel Reynolds sitting in your chair there, and he told us that based on, even with minimal displacement, with a turnover of people that, let's say they factor through these where some of them switch to mortgage to rent, some of them switch to that they're repossessed and they're rented again. And you could he said the best case scenario was a trebling of the current homelessness crisis. And let's just put that, we're talking in loans. To buy the loans, I think, when you were saying about private investors reaching out, they reckon you could buy those loans for somewhere around the 5 billion mark. Okay, that was the estimate you could purchase the loan books for around the 5 billion mark. The cost of the emergency accommodation, the HAP payment that comes in, all sorts of housing assistance payments that we all go into now, that was factored out over, say, the life of the loans was factored out somewhere around 11 billion. So the state are actually doing the most economically incompetent thing as well.
I'll give you a better example, a very simpler example. iCare Housing is an approved housing body. Buys a house for €100,000.
Yeah.
Right? And the state give us, say, 20% of that as a deposit. It's called a CAF payment. Low interest, good gig, over 30 years. Don't pay anything for 30 years. And I rent it to the local authority. And I get 750 quid. If I get a discount from the bank, if I buy that house for 50 grand, I go, good man, David, you have to screw in the bank. Get a discount from the bank. I go to the local authority, the housing agency, say, can we rent the house to you now? Yeah. But we're only actually going to give you 400 quid a month rent. Oh. If Martin rented the house, you'd give him 700 quid. Because we bought the house cheap and we screwed the bank. You want to screw me? So this system was never designed to deal with the scale and the emergency that's there at the moment. They don't actually have, there's this revolving fund to buy empty homes. The revolving fund is jammed because allegedly we 5 billion. I actually don't believe the money is there. I don't believe the money is there for housing and homelessness. I genuinely have a very clear view that everybody, and when it's like a cult, when people keep telling you the money's there, you start believing less.
They've repeated often and often that money is not an issue. Money is not an issue. Money is not an issue, and yet we don't see it in where it's.
But I'm doing a negotiation currently with a number of the banks with John O'Connor, who's the head of the housing agency, a brilliant guy and a genuine guy. But the most frightening part is that between us, we now believe that the banks have shown us probably a stock of about 1,700 empty houses. Now, it's just. I'm not talking about a sort of an empty house. I'm talking about a house that's vetted by the local authority, deemed eligible for social housing. Not my idea to say, that's a lovely house. I'm not wandering around saying there's a boarded up house that might be suitable.
Yeah.
Houses eligible. He bought 400 of them last year. He had great difficulty transferring them across to approved housing bodies, and we're trying to step into the breach. So Permanent TSB has 950 empty homes. One of the agreements was prior to their sale was they take out all people eligible for mortgage rent. All those empty homes were taken out of the sale book. AIB told the Oireachtas Committee last month that they have 900 empty homes. We met the other banks, and the Vulture Funds have between them probably 700 as well. So if we have all the money, 8,000 people in emergency accommodation, 3,500 kids, despicable by any government in the world, why wouldn't you just rock up and hand over a cheque and say, give the houses, lads? They're willing to give them. It's not as if you've got to go and say, sell them to us, don't sell them on the open market. They've said, no, we'll give you first refusal on them. You can buy them, and not only will we buy them, we will deduct the 10 or 12 or 11 grand it takes for you to bring them up to specification. We'll allow you the price and we deduct them. All willing and able, and yet we have the money and we can't convert. Bullshit. Something's wrong somewhere.
But this is Fine Gael's moral hazard. And that's what it is. Somebody might get something for nothing. And this is what they preach. The idea, and both Mel and Lorcan and indeed Rory, in fact everybody we've had on about housing has pointed this out. These are the cheap solutions. These are the cheap solutions. Every other solution costs you more. So if you can park your moral hazard and get over yourself, you can actually solve the situation cheaply.
We've seen it with homelessness. We saw the derogatory comments in relation to homelessness. We saw the derogatory comments from the chair of the housing agency. We've seen the derogatory comments in relation to the banks around people who are in default. So there's a constant theme of bashing those who need support and need help. Because, you know what? If you've sinned, if you've had bad behaviour, and if you're gaming the system, screw you.
And again, goes back to the point where I said it before, when the guy who, systems are made to be gamed. Okay, folks, that's the reality. They're there. They're going to be people will take advantage of it. It's a minuscule number of people who are taking advantage of it, but nonetheless it happens. But when they do what's called moral hazard, when one bank is transferring assets overnight to another bank to balance its balance sheet, so an auditor can go in and say it's solvent and pass it back, and then the entire economy crashes, that was called we all partied. Okay? that was never called moral hazard, or there was a 20 grand fine handed down last week to Irish Nationwide, and 3 years.
But they consented to the 20 grand fine.
Consented, and that's the important
now
piece.
handed down is different than only handed down is your headmaster stuff now is handed down. But this was consented to. So it's like the bank. So there's no other jurisdiction in the world, if you look at the tracker mortgage thing, there is absolutely no other jurisdiction in the world where the offender set the fine. Nowhere. Nowhere. That's like a guard ringing up the old lad who's robbed the bank saying, "How are you? What's the story? Will you do 6 months?" And we go into the judge and say, "How are you, Judge? Johnny's going in for 6 months. He's the bag packed."
Can I ask you?
Where the fuck would you get it? Where would you get it? What's going to happen next? The police going to ring up and say, "I know we abused you. What's the story? How do you fix it? I tell you what we're going to do now." Actually, it's even worse. Those fuckers haven't even given over the stuff they said they'd give over. Yeah. So we're going to say, "How are you, lads? We've had a chat, and I know. And look, I'm sorry. I know we ran over your wife. I'm sorry we broke her legs. I'm sorry I was pissed. But here, I'm going to give you 2 grand. Is that okay?"
Yeah. And a packet of crisps.
A packet of crisps.
Tweeted it when I saw it. I said, 20 grand. That's going to have bankers the world over shaking in their Gucci loafers. Yeah. And that's the truth of it. 20 grand is nothing to these people. They'd spend that on prostitutes in Iceland.
Why did he point at me?
Yeah. I'm glad you pointed at him, not me.
But can I just, on the tracker piece, it's staggering, because it was reported that there's €1 billion fine is what was reported. Now, it was 300 to 400 million estimated in processing costs, and 600 in recompense and paying back. That works redress works out less than 18,000 per case that's been abused. Now, more importantly, I want to just put that in the international context. They messed around with Repayment Protector in the UK, where they missold it on loans, and this was loans and credit cards, and it's Repayment Protector. And they got fined in the billions. I think it was 9.8 billion.
No, just go back in the billion, because the billion, we're back. It's a great example, because we're back to what the public are trying to be sold.
Yes.
Forgetting one very important thing: $500 million was stolen money. half the billion was money they robbed.
Just giving you back
with
money.
The customer's money.
Yeah, just giving you back money.
And worse, even when they went into the Oireachtas Committee in December, despite being admonished by the minister, and he was going to give them all, it's a lovely word, I had to look it up, it was a lovely word, he admonished them and gave out to them and told them we were bowl boys. By the way, he was able to tell Permanent TSB CEO is a bowl boy about the tracker. He was able to bring the Permanent TSB CEO in as a 75% shareholder to have a go about the variable rate. He's not able to get involved, the old Vulture Funds saying. It's terrible, isn't it?
No, the double standard and the hypocrisy that doesn't get called out, that's never really called out publicly. It's they can turn around and they say we can't meddle and make in commercial decisions, and yet they can do it when it comes to
any PR gig around that walk of shame. It wasn't even a walk of shame; it was a walk of cappuccino. But he then went and said, "We're going to have all his money paid back." Your own this does take time to take a step back, take a deep breath, and say, "This is not paying over a fine." The central bank have only fined Springboard, which was a subsidiary of Permanent TSB. They haven't fined anybody else yet. So it's not about paying a fine. This is paying back money. So the most elementary thing you do if you've done something wrong and stolen from someone when you're going to Park 8 Street down to the criminal courts is, one of the mitigating factors is you give them the money back.
That's right.
You might get a couple of months off. You might get, about the current system, unless you import some garlic, you get a couple of years off. But no. Not only will we not give you the money back, we'll go in and stick our fingers up the Oireachtas Committee on Finance, and then we'll go into the minister and stick fingers up at him, and everyone gets on fine.
And more importantly, I noticed, I'm going back on it, but 6 months ago, the central bank said, we're giving the banks time, and the banks were bouncing around, if you remember, at 13,400 of these tracker cases. We knew the number was closer to 40.
Well, you said it, and you did say it.
And it was bouncing around, and it was, we found more. And the central bank sat on its hands and said, they're coming to us and telling us. My God, who allows the police to police themselves in these sort of incredible...
Now regime Mugabe be proud of.
Yeah.
It is incredible to think, and to think that they had full control. And again, there's no jurisdiction in the world that allows the abuser set the penalty and set the inverted commas, the independent redress process and the independent appeal. There's nowhere in the world that allows it.
Yeah, well, Pascal stood by and said, well, if they don't do it, we'll call them back in again. And,
A cup of coffee.
Yeah, but this morning...
I reckon he cracked his finger waving it at them. I reckon he must have waved really hard.
There's a huge problem here, Martin, and it boils down to the fact that the banks themselves, they want to make sure that the banks are performing, that they can get them back, sell off their shareholding and say that they nurse them back to health, and at the expense of who?
But that's the duplicity in all of this, and that is the duplicity. That they're talking a good game about taking care of people who've been stung and hurt, and as we've said, sick and even killed themselves over banking debt and over the behaviour of banks. They talk this game, but the actual game they're playing is keeping the bank assets as high as they possibly can.
The game's up now. Like when you start selling people who've done as you asked.
Yes.
You used to get away with selling a couple of hobos. You could say, sure, your man's really a messer. Everyone was strategic defaulters,
And he ran off to Australia.
Yeah, and there's always going to be a handful of messers. Always. And you're going to remember, many people are terrified. They're not messers. They're fearful and terrified. And this process and systems that were involved in dealing with the banks and dealing with the mortgage arrears was very, very complicated and very, very difficult. But ultimately, this is now going to get very rough. This is now going to get very dangerous. History is going to decide how many repossessions there were. My job has been to, get as many people to engage through ourselves or anyone else that they trust to try and restructure their loans. Heretofore, I was saying you're better off restructuring your loan rather than being sold to a vulture. Now it's 50-50 cashback. But the ultimate objective here is there is help, there's free help, there's professional help, and it needs to be engaged with because this is their own life, their family, their friends, their community.
But do you see this a little like homelessness, where there is no red line figure? There is no point we're going to pass where everybody's going to throw their hands up and say thus far and no further. And that this is just going to keep creeping and creeping and creeping.
I'll give you an example. The little cock-up that is the Lewis and the College Green and all that stuff.
Yes.
At least when there's a cock-up of that proportion and a conversation and a challenge, the old transport lads have a chat. So you have a little chat with the bus fellas, you have a little chat with the Lewis lads, you have a little chat with the taxi lads, and you have a little plan. We have a homelessness and housing crisis, and we've 14,000 family home loans, which affects 55,000 humans.
Yes. Just
about to be sold to Vulture Funds with unclear, uncertain pathway of what's going to happen. The highly likely majority of them, or a significant number of them, will be repossessed because the Vulture Funds won't restructure them. Same now with Ulster Bank this morning, 7,000 loans, and other banks to come. So somewhere along the line, you would expect a competent government and competent ministers to actually have some joined up thinking as a preventative mechanism rather than trying to deal with the chaos. These are not small numbers.
Yeah, big numbers.
14,000 mortgages. So let's say the bank is right. Let's just say, yep, you're great lads. The bullshit you come out in your press releases are fantastically accurate. They're all dysfunctional, non-engaged basket cases. Where are they going to end up? Right on your homeless list.
Yeah, no, if that is the case, we're just literally, if going back to it, we're cutting off our noses to spite our faces here, folks, by not acting now. And I actually think you're wrong, Martin, as well. I think after a decade of this and the recent things that are boiled up, where people have realised they did it with the trackers only in January. They did this with the trackers, and they're seeing these things, and they know people are really agitated. And the idea that the banks are going to pull another fast one is starting to get it's starting to boil up. I really do think.
I'll just come back to it, and this is your trope, Tony. They only have to convince 36% of the voters. That's all they have to convince.
It's awkward when Martin throws a little trope that I use all the time back at me, but he's right. There is an element of, if you're in the government and you're in the business of just being re-elected, there's a basis where I'm always reminded of. Do you know what Al Qaeda stands for?
No.
Anybody know what Al Qaeda actually means? It means the base, right? And I always think that was Bin Laden's base. And George Bush used to talk about his base, and we always talk about it, but we don't talk about it enough here. That the voter, the people in power appeal to their base. So if you're appealing to landlords, corporates, people who are going to actually, and I hate to break it down as well, it comes from the top down, like all the way from the ECB. A lot of the stuff that PTSB are actually doing is on the basis of what the ECB dictated and the European Banking Authority as well, the EBA. They have to follow through on these. But people can change those things if people get more engaged and people get more, get in touch with their own local TDs. Nothing frightens them more than actually their own constituents getting active, getting aware, getting woke. There's nothing worse than saying woke, but there you go.
Well, there's 20,000 permanent TSB mortgage holders, and no one knows who they are, by the way. Like, you've got to remember, everyone has made the assumption, and we had loads of journalists contact me and say, have any of them been in touch with you? I don't know. What do you mean you don't know? This is they haven't told.
Remember Carly Bailey told the story about literally that Ulster Bank sold her loan, but they didn't tell her. She just got an 8-page letter that she couldn't get her head around. That's
the process.
Yeah.
And the same thing, so there's loads of people being effectively tortured. Like, if you're going to go and do this, and like this comes back to dealing with humans, you go and send a letter out to someone and to at least tell them they're in the pot. But many people actually don't know now. So people say, well, have you someone who might be affected we could talk to? No one knows.
And more importantly, they won't know because there'll be people sitting there going, well, actually, it was back in 2010, we had a bit of a blip with the mortgage there, but we did this and we cut our cloth to suit her. And sure, we're not in that. We're now...
We're conforming.
And you're going to find yourself in that pot. Yeah. And you're going to find yourself in that pot in Ulster Bank, and you're going to find yourself in that pot in AIB.
The worst part is that all those restructurings have a review clause in there.
Yes.
And, there is a chance, and to be honest, there's a chance that one of the mainstream banks will buy those loans. Yes, the solutions they have are similar and they are voluntary, but they would be far safer. But again, back to joining the dots, any competent government would have arranged for Bank of Ireland or AIB to have bought those split mortgages or restructured loans to protect customers and not pile on trouble and have uncertainty in relation to Vulture Funds. Vulture Funds will absolutely screw the customer when it comes to review. They don't have a mechanism. They don't have it. Like, people say, they're lovely people. They don't have the mechanism. That's like saying, I'm going to buy the car and I'm going to drive. It actually doesn't have 4 wheels. You can't drive the car. You can't restructure a loan, but you don't have the mechanism to facilitate restructure. So they should have sold them to Bank of Ireland. They should have sold them to AIB and kept people safe in those. And then dealt with the alleged, let's go back to the alleged non-engagers, because I would respectfully say half those alleged non-engagers have engaged through ourselves, MABS and others. And MABS South Mayo did a great report, a very detailed forensic report, where they did 50 customer engagements. Every one of them engaged. Now, one of them could get a solution. They all engaged through MABS. Confirmed engagement, no solution. So that is a spin from the banks, but a dangerous one.
But there is a fear of super vultures.
My biggest fear is the super vulture. And I speak to the Vulture Funds and I speak to the individual vultures, and they take the piss a bit and they'd have a bit of a pop and stuff, but they're never actually overly, they know I would not tell the truth. But the concern I have is when they say to you, well, David, we're after increasing the price of a house in Clare down to $9,000. Dublin's going up $25,000 a year. There is nowhere in the world that our portfolio is increasing at the same level, and we don't even have to get our hands dirty.
Yeah.
And I know it goes against the argument of repossessions, but that doesn't mean that the problem doesn't exist. You've got to remember, the problem with repossessions is someone's inability to pay their full mortgage or a variation or a structure of the mortgage, restructuring the mortgage. So my big fear is that literally they sell it on to lads with balaclavas and say, here you go, we've made the same amount of money as we had intended to make, but more, because we've saved ourselves $4,500 repossession. And
we avoided the legal fees, and we've avoided the...
Some guy with a Russian accent is knocking on your door saying, well, but that's right. That's
the concern. And also, not just with the family home loans, but also with residual debt. So there's also a risk in relation to residual debt. Like Danske has just sold some stuff now, some residual commercial debt. Bank of Ireland up to now didn't write off debt for mortgage rent. So even though you are in the most vulnerable category, they still said, no, we want the residual debt. But no, you've confirmed I'm eligible for social housing. The local authorities confirmed I'm eligible for social housing, and you still want the residual debt.
We have to give Richie Vulture a shout out now. He managed to do a phenomenal job of getting out of Bank of Ireland, leaving the tracker debacle to his replacement.
I will say though, and I won't use any words to describe him appropriately, but I will say I haven't met the new lady, Francesca, but what I've heard from staff is that there's a big broom being wielded around that bank. and there are a couple of lads and ladies out in their arse.
And they're the same.
They're the same, and that's good news. And to be fair to her as well, and the central bank did force them on the 6,000 extra trackers. So it wouldn't be hard to change the policy, the environment, but it's good to see.
It's nice to hear someone talking about actual cultural change as opposed
and
to
acting on it, not just talking about it, where you can see not publicly being done, but privately being done.
What keeps you going? What keeps you going in all of this? I mean, most people would just bang their heads off the wall after a couple of years and say, I've had enough of this crap.
Well, I think one thing, like, everyone's human. Yeah. You've only got so much in you. But I think once there's progress, and if progress is keeping people in their homes, you won't win all the battles. If progress is developing, like with iCare housing, where you're going to actually change and save lives by people staying in their homes, the same with the Irish Mortgage Holders Organisation, where there's a difference being done, you're always going to meet resistance. You're always going to meet, we've all seen and witnessed them, keyboard warriors who have no productive function in life.
It's two of them in here.
That's true. I'm glad you said that. You should sign you up for a bit of therapy. Anyone who writes 12,000 words.
Yeah. Sorry.
Needs a bit of help. That's like when I was in 4th class, I wrote a story that was about 16 pages long. I killed the same snake 5 times. It was a 16-page story. So what keeps me going is seeing the difference we can make. Someone said the other day, David, we just noticed that between different charities in different parts of the sector, so disability, homelessness, housing and stuff, might be 1900. There's 2 debt charities. There's 2 debt charities speaking out against banks and engaging on behalf of people with banks, where in other sectors that's an average multiple of 20.
Yeah.
So it's a difficult area. Banks pick on you. When you've got a business and others, you've got to be very, very careful on how you conduct your business and what you do. People looking to catch you out all the time. People have a lot of money in the game, both professionals, lawyers, funds, banks. It's a very, very lucrative business. But the main thing is that when I get, small presents at Christmas from a couple of kids who are now in properties where they wouldn't be the pictures or drawings, which they traditionally are. I got a bunch of socks last year. That's what keeps you going. Once you know you can make a difference.
And do you have a banker pinata out the back that you go out and just beat with a stick?
No, I do it on gigs like this, and it's therapeutic. I could have saved a lot of money on therapy by having a go and spank the banks, as I call it.
Well, thank you so much for coming in. It's been a pleasure to have you in here. I've learned stuff. I mean, I know you two guys talk this stuff all the time, but I've learned stuff. I have, definitely. Thank you.
Good, thank you.
No, honestly, and for because I do know that there's going to be the reaction, David, you get is, here he goes, he's pontificating, he's this, and you go, you know what, guys, anybody who says any of that crap, or anybody who comes at me, if David keeps someone in his home, you know what, and you think that that's all right, you're going to take a shot at someone like that, you want to look at yourself, okay, because these are people who are actually walking the walk. I know even the Konstantin Gurdjieff was on a few months ago with us, and we were talking, and he was saying that David just goes from one situation to another to help people, and ultimately, if that's the end game, and you want to take shots, and you want to be the keyboard warriors, you know what? Go at Martin. He'll engage with you all day long.
Well, in fairness, I think if you unbutton that shirt, there's a big S underneath it. Am I right about this?
No, but even when look at it, when the banks are trying to engage with you, they know it works.
Yes.
Like when the banks are coming at you to say, let's work with you to make this happen, because it is happening, and they can see the benefit of having trusted third parties make this work, and that is very, very strong. But also, this saves lives. This changes lives. This completely changes and alters the pathway of different families by having third parties be able to represent them and speak. I don't particularly care, and I'm fortunate enough to be able to speak on their behalf and not particularly be overly sensitive. Others aren't, and many. There's not a queue, Tony. It can be a lonely spot. There's a bunch of housing agencies and homelessness agencies and mental health organisations and aged care, the elderly, who can rotate and speak in health organisations, health charities. There's thousands of them. There's 2 debt charities. That in itself says a lot.
And I'll tell you, folks, where I'm going to finish it, what I say to people is when you're sitting down and we're having a conversation, you're renegotiating debts and things like that, and you say to them, you're not going to be sitting comfortably because you're not sleeping well. It's a burden. It's on your chest, and it's on your mind all the time. The idea that after you've sat down with someone like IMHO or iCare or whoever that third party advocate is, independent, the idea is that you're sitting a bit more comfortably and you may actually sleep a bit better. that makes a difference. So thank you for that, Dave.
Anyone who's in difficulty, there's a bunch of help. There's between mortgageholders.ie, there's iCarehousing.ie, there's Back on Track, which is the insolvency service, and there's many PIPs that are excellent there. And there's also MABS. Any of the MABS offices. Help is available. Seek it. Find your comfort zone, but seek it. Don't do it on your own.
We'll put the links up with the podcast. Okay,
guys. I just want to thank you all for listening. Let you know that we've actually running 2 microphones. Thanks to the crowdfunded by you guys. We rely on you guys. Hit subscribe, leave us a review, tell your friends, share the news, buy us a cup of coffee. If you get a minute, go into our website, echochamberpod.com. Martin has written a piece, and when I say a piece, it's more of a novel, but it's the definitive guide on bogus self-employment and the gig economy. It's getting a lot of traction, guys, and I'm telling you, we'll see him on Tonight TV3 by the end of the week. Thanks very much for listening.
Thank you.